We had more protests happening. Some good ones, honestly. There was a good one out of UCLA. There was a negative one out of UCLA as well, but there was a pro-Israel protest, if you will, in support of Israel, demonstration that was very hopeful, very joyful. You could see the physical difference in it. You could see the UCLA Palestinian protesters, just spewing out evil, and then you turned over shortly and you saw dancing and fun and joy, much like, by the way, how it is in Israel, which is you cross the border and you see sadness, you see, extreme fundamentalism, you see, women being treated like second-class citizens, if not worse, and then you go turn over and you just look towards Israel, and all of a sudden there's people dancing in the streets, having a blast, living a free life. But also, it didn't stop, though, Will, because even at George Washington University, we saw even the small attempts to blockade this were being taken over.
That's right. And similar to what Harvard did, where they restricted their yard to students only, George Washington University, which is in D.C., was trying to limit the outside agitators, the professional protesters, professional organizers, as we've been seeing around the country, and trying to at least limit it to students. But there was an encampment between the University Yard and H Street, where at 11:28 p.m. last night, protesters toppled the police barricades that were set up. So these weren't just university barricades. These were police barricades. They were toppled. It looks like a bizarro world Les Miserables, where they're standing on top of the barricades, waving a Palestinian flag with a bullhorn, shouting their hateful rhetoric. And the police tried to then arrest some of these people that toppled these barricades, and the protesters pushed back so much so that it seems like the police officers were maybe in fear of their safety. Yes. According to the report from the student paper, the organizers said the demonstrators were able to de-arrest the detained protesters as chants from the crowd against the police continued. So a very tumultuous situation, and we're seeing that spread across the country.
Here's the deal also. I was talking to my team earlier today, and I said we keep reporting on this, hoping that these would just end. Currently, apparently at 2 p.m. Eastern time, Columbia is supposed to end their encampment. That's the deadline for students and for, I guess, protesters, not most of them are not students, to get off campus. We did also have that guy we talked about last week who did pretty much calling for the death to all of us who are listening right now. He was banned from campus and I believe suspended. Expelled. I believe. Yeah. So you know what? Maybe there's some positive movement in that sense, but I want to lead with this phone call that could take us into this conversation. Robert in Maryland, on line 1, you're on the air.
I wanted to ask you a question. What are the faculty members and administrators on the college campuses where these anti-Israel demonstrations are taking place, and these pro-Palestinian demonstrators calling for the destruction of Israel, hating Zionists, and also discriminating against Jewish students and also Christian students that support the existence of the nation Israel? What do they plan on doing in terms of disciplinary action against these types of things taking place?
Look, I think, Robert, that's a good question. I'm going to defer to Harry a bit here, someone who's been in that situation, been in academia and had to deal with students maybe having disagreements, but maybe not on this level, not to where the protests were overrunning the campus. But what would you do in this situation if you're a faculty member and these kind of demonstrations are happening on your campus?
Well, first, the more elite the university, the more unlikely it is that the university administrators and faculty are prepared to do anything. So if you look at the pattern that unfolded during the Antifa riots and the BLM protests that commenced in 2020, for instance, several things are clear about the, some might say, insane political unrest on university campuses. First, I would argue that the spirit of lawless hatred has been unleashed on college campuses throughout the United States, and this spirit is really accompanied by actions that go well beyond the boundaries of free speech. So you see colleges shutting down, essentially, commencement exercises, classes from the East Coast to the West Coast. And there is minimal pushback, I would argue, from university administrators. In part, I think they are afraid of the students. And so part of the issue, I think, long run is many students have been raised, I would argue, without parents. And that's not something that we can address in the short run. And secondarily, I would argue, consistent with comments I've made earlier, that the more privileged the students are, the more elite the campus is, the more unlikely that the administrators are prepared to act. And if indeed they are prepared to act, then the question becomes, are the political leaders in certain areas, let's say Washington, D.C., prepared to allow the police to do their job? And generally speaking, I would say they're unwilling to allow the police to do their job. This is political and some might say moral insanity. But lastly, Thomas Sowell has said that in politics, we should never assume that because something is insane, it will not be done. And I think that is unfolding in the United States. So the students are saying death to Israel, death to the United States. But before death to the United States occurs, please pay off our student loans. Right. This is absurd.
Right. And I think that's even a good point, because there's a lot of people even out there saying, well, the faculty is not only just scared of press and media reaction, they're also scared of parents. So you're saying it's a lack of parenting, but there's also going to be parents who are going, how dare you do this to my student who is just setting up a tent on campus and protesting and chanting death to America. We're withdrawing our funds. We are, we're going to take our donations somewhere else. Will, it is kind of living in the upside down world when you do have that movement of going, oh, it's beyond, it's so elite that it's like they meet in the middle. They meet in a horseshoe.
Well, and there was this article from the New York Times over the weekend that it's the headline is "Denied a Second Chance at a Normal Senior Year." And it was drawing comparisons about how this class that's preparing to graduate here at universities across the country were also seniors in high school when, at the beginning of the pandemic, when pretty much across the country during that first May, schools were shut down. So the following one, yes, many in California may have not had normal graduations, but at this point, this first May of 2020, many schools didn't have traditional commencement ceremonies, at least in the way that many want of the pomp and circumstance. But they were trying to draw this comparison between the pandemic shutting down schools and now on these college campuses, many aren't able to do that because of these protests. But it just caught me as odd that there was no call directly on university boards, faculty, administration to say, we can stop this. We can stop this quickly. We can call the police in. We can disband the encampments and set up security measures. But there doesn't seem to be the will of these university administrations to give this normal senior year commencement to many of these college campuses.
I think you're precisely correct, and I think their will and willingness to take action has been drained by the feckless belief that taking action is seen as right-wing speech. So in other words, shutting down unrest that prevents speech, that prevents a university from operating, that prevents a university from educating students, that is seen as a right-wing move. And I think many of the administrators and many of the faculty, they are unwilling to take action. So they're unwilling to make the hard choices. And I also would argue that their unwillingness actually breeds more unrest. So it just multiplies.
One of the things we're doing, and we were talking about this in our radio meeting, before we do a broadcast, we have a meeting and we discuss, what can we do? And look, this topic is one that's been coming up. Obviously, we've been doing this now, covering it for almost a week, and it still is getting traction as it's escalating. Now, back in December, there was threats against Jewish students on campuses back since all time, but really in the last 6 months, it's really ramped up. So we were already engaged legally. We were already sending letters, but we decided today that we're going to take even more action. Our legal team right now is preparing demand letters to all of the institutions that these encampments are happening at. And also we're going to provide it to you. So if you have a student who's in it, or you're one of those students, you can have what your rights are as well, because we believe they have a legal obligation to protect not just Jewish students, but pro-Zionist students, which is essentially evangelical Christians. and we have to stop violent protests on these campuses. We can't do that without you and your support at the ACLJ. You can do it right now by donating, making a gift during this Life and Liberty Drive. And it sounds like I'm just doing a pitch here, but I'm getting our team in action. And Harry, someone who's been there, we know that even in academia, pressure from outside legal organizations really can make a big difference, because all of a sudden the heat gets turned up.
I think that's absolutely correct. And one of the things that I would encourage listeners to respond to is the fact that we need to generate more heat, more and more, because I think this particular battle is likely to continue for several months.